fellow Toastmasters. I really am a crazy woman these days because my son's bar mitzvah is in December, and I can't even go suit shopping for him yet because he's 12 years old. And as some of you may know, when you're 12 years old, you grow every single month. So I can't even look for the suit yet, and I'm trying to figure out when I have to actually start doing that. But I could look for the tie because ties are generally one size fits all. We're having a music-themed bar mitzvah, so I was looking for a musical-themed tie. I'll get to that later. But it got me wondering, why on earth do we wear ties? Who wants to tie a noose around their neck? Seriously, why do we do this to ourselves? Is there some kind of function behind the tie? Or is it just a tie? Well, I found out from Wikipedia, my first source, that a tie or necktie is a long piece of cloth worn for decorative purposes around the neck or shoulders, resting under the shirt collar and knotted at the throat. I was right, it's a noose. Knotted at the throat. Why on earth do people do this to themselves? Have you ever worn a necktie? Most of the men here have probably worn a necktie. Maybe some of the women as well have worn neckties. So where did this whole crazy situation come from? Well, it all started way back. I found a wonderful 14.5-minute video on YouTube about the history of neckties. It was the most informative thing I have ever watched, even though it was slightly boring. So I will condense the facts for you. It all started with collars. People wanted to wear something decorative around their neck. Maybe because they had smallpox scars. I don't know. I couldn't find that in the research, but they had these big ornate collars, which were hand done. All that lace, all that pleating. Think about the hours of work that went into this and how much that cost. So this is a very rich person. But even the poor people had some sort of collars, and sometimes they were very, very stiff. So the neck wear was never very comfortable. Does that look comfortable? I mean, seriously. And then another reason that ties developed was because people wore wigs. Back then, people had either very, very long hair of their own, which is sometimes wore natural or sometimes colored, or they wore powdered wigs. How often did people bathe back then? Does anybody know how often people bathed in like the 18th century?
Once a year.
Some people once a year. The very rich people who had these wigs maybe once a month. Well, what do you think their hair or wig was like if they didn't bathe or clean very often? And if there was a powdered wig, imagine that powder getting everywhere. So what did that do to your clothes? It destroyed your clothes. So they came up with a very clever thing. I will put my wig in a little baggie, which is what this is. This is a wig bag, and they would wear the wig bag tied in what looks very much like a bow tie behind the back. But sometimes the strings were long, and they tied them around the front as well, which is where the noose got started. Sorry, which is where the front necktie got started. Then there were also uniforms. This is an older French uniform from about 1870-something. And this guy's wearing what looks kind of like an ascot today. It's kind of flowy and fun looking, and it looks kind of nice, but what if you lean forward when you're wearing that? If you're in battle, guns, things with mechanical parts, maybe not such a good idea. So some regiments wore very stiff collars. They were very highly starched. In fact, there were some people who wore very starched collars to the point that it cut off the circulation of the blood to the head, and it gave them a very ruddy appearance. So these soldiers were walking around looking very ruddy until they fainted. They did, in fact, sometimes faint because of the lack of oxygen to their brains. And then we came up with, much later, the bow tie, which is a much more modern invention because of factory workers. Because of what I said before, if you're leaning forward and you have a flowy thing, and you have machinery, you have a choice. Do I want to die or do I want to wear a tie? So why are they wearing these things around their necks? Fashion, fashion, fashion. A lot of men say, oh, my wife is so into fashion and blah, blah, blah. But the necktie is all about male fashion. Very few women really do wear neckties. It's a very male fashion-oriented thing. And as you can see, this has been around for a really, really long time. It's all about the fashion. So many kinds of neckties. That was the history of the necktie. Now we're going to get into modern day neckties, and I'm going to show you some of the more modern approaches to a necktie. This is the cravat. mostly seen in very formal or cute little costumes, as you can see, the pirate here. It's adorable. Then you have the modern day necktie. The first neckties didn't have these kinds of patterns on it, but because of all the things we can do with textiles these days, starting in about the 50s and the 60s, people started to really embellish their ties with all kinds of really fun patterns or slogans and things on them. So now the necktie is not just a fashion thing, it's a statement piece. Then you can have a very whimsical bow tie, like that one, or you can have the very dapper tie tails, as you see on Mr. Cooper over here. It's very sharp, doesn't it? Then there's a bolo tie. A bolo tie is sometimes called a string tie. It's very southwestern. As you can see, there's a lot of silver and turquoise, and this guy must be a cattle rancher. That is quite the tie there. Then there's an ascot, which I've only seen on Fred from Scooby-Doo, Shaggy, if you know that cartoon. And the ascot is very fluffed and has to be tied in a certain way and put into your shirt a certain way, and most of us, it's not very practical. In fact, tying a tie is very difficult. When I was about, 35 or so, I just moved down here, and my neighbor was, their son was having his graduation, and the husband wasn't home, and he didn't know how to tie his tie. So she comes running to my house because she knew that I had boys. She said, "Do you know how to tie a tie?" Luckily I did, and I tied his tie for him, and he went off to graduation looking like a mensch, as we would say, which is a nice gentleman. So he looked okay in his tie, but she didn't know how to tie a tie, he didn't know how to tie a tie. And with Dad not around, what do? Well, you can get a tie cheat. They have clip-ons. You can get a clip-on in a bow tie or in a regular tie. And I've even seen bow ties with Velcro that wraps around the neck, which makes it really look like you've tied the bow tie. It's a very good cheat. I had one for my little baby. Then, this was brand new. I love shopping. See, shopping is research. Don't let anybody tell you otherwise. It really is. I mean, I was looking all over the place for different kinds of ties. It was a great research or topic thing. So I found that you have actually a zipper tie where it's a hidden zipper in the back. It looks like a regular tie. But then this guy, he doesn't care. He's not ashamed. That zipper is right dab in the middle of his tie. He's telling the world, I don't know how to tie my tie. I just zip it up. Just like that. But he doesn't seem to have much fashion sense because he's wearing this gray blazer and those kind of ragged jeans. So you can also do ties as gifts, which is why I started originally, looking for a tie for my son for a gift for his bar mitzvah, to wear at his bar mitzvah. You never lose this tie, Mom and I got you, because it glows in the dark. But you can have holiday ties, sports ties, music ties. This is the one I got from Miles. It's a French horn. He plays the French horn. And my advice to you all is, just find what you like, tie one on.